to Psychedelics Today. Joe here, joined by Greg Lake. How are you doing today, Greg?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here, Joe.
Yeah, really excited to dig in today. I think this idea might have been maybe nascent when we first met in person at the Salt Lake City conference last winter. But it sounds like it's really grown a lot of legs. I guess let's give folks a high-level understanding of what you're up to. Then we'll kind of rewind the tape and set the stage, and then keep going forward. So, what is this project you're up to right now? The Church of Psilomethoxin.
Okay, so yeah, as you said, the name of it is the Church of Psilomethoxin. And I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later, but a lot of people know that my legal career, especially over the last 3 years, has been kind of specializing in the religious exemption as it relates to entheogens, the religious use of entheogens. So, which admittedly is also my personal religious spiritual practice and has been for at least the last 4 or 5 years. And so this project is kind of a culmination of all that. And so back in 2021, probably mid to late October, my law partner at the time, Ian Benwees, who I've been working with on a bunch of these church projects. He read it is weird.
He was a partner at
like
your firm,
sequence.
you said? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so he was actually the original partner at our firm, and then when we linked up on the church work together, I came in under his wing, I guess you'd
Cool.
say, and yeah. So and he's a entheogen-based religious practitioner for I think over 25 years. Had worked extensively with 5-MeO DMT, and so yeah, through some weird synchronicities that he would do better explaining, he ended up running across an Alexander Shulgin article that was published on Alexander Shulgin's website back in 2005. The name of the website, Cognitive Liberty. As many people know that Alexander Shulgin was very famous for answering people's queries when they would write them, and so when the digital age came, he started publishing those. And someone asked about what about 4-hydroxylated 5-MeO DMT? What do you know about it? Things of that nature. And so in his response, he noted that, back in 1965, I believe the Pasteur Institute had actually synthesized from orthovanillin this particular compound, but the fact that it's very, very onerous and labor intensive to actually synthesize it from orthovanillin. And so, that mixed in combination with the later Controlled Substances Act, basically it was the death knell for psilomethoxin. I think it was placed on a shelf and forgot about. Well, in this article in 2005, Alexander Shulgin, he proposed, so other people, I think in Germany prior to this in the 80s, had been mixing like DET and maybe one other synthetic tryptamine with psilocybin mushroom substrates, and they were producing the 4-hydroxylated versions of those synthetic novel tryptamines. So he theorized in this letter that could be done with potentially. He said, give you even odds that it could potentially be done with 5-MeO DMT. To create this compound we're discussing now, the 4-hydroxylated version of 5-MeO, psilomethoxin. So at the time, Ian had the resources together to be able to try this, and so he executed on the theory. And lo and behold, and just so people know that the 5-MeO is added to the mushroom substrate, right? So it's when the fruiting body comes out. Is where the psilomethoxin appears within the fruiting body, just like any regular psilocybin mushroom fruiting body, except there's only little to no trace of psilocybin, and then mostly this compound, psilomethoxin. So, immediately him and several other veterans, he's a war veteran, did a week-long dieta with it, and settled on the fact that this is absolutely a new and novel, substance based upon its effects and things of that nature, and the fact that the mushrooms, barely any bruising, if any, barely any blue. And so at that point, within a week from then, actually, we filed the church with Texas, because that's just kind of our forte, was to file the church. But at that time, we just didn't know enough about its real safety profile and the range of effects and things of that nature to really publicly go out and be like, hey, everybody take this. So we worked for probably the next 10 months within our own, I would say, medicine circles with a lot of veterans, dispensing the sacrament, and people trying and reporting back. And so we the other day we were thinking we probably gave it to about 250, 300 people, who all reported back, a few observations. Those people who are very experienced with entheogens said that, yeah, this is absolutely something new and novel. That seems to be just like an orally available, but weaker form of 5-MeO, in that everyone had pretty much incredible experiences and great things to say. We didn't have any negative reports. So then come September of 2022, we felt confident that, hey, we can open this up to a larger swath of the community. And so then we publicly came out with the church, via our website, and created social media and stuff like that. And, our initial round of people were really just experienced practitioners, right? So one of the qualifications to get in the church is to like have some prior experience, to agree in the spiritual religious use of entheogens, and a few other minor requirements. But it's really just probing people to make sure that we feel confident that they have worked with entheogens before, and that they know how to safely work with the sacrament, right? So, yeah, so we opened the church in September, have been growing ever since. And so we do biweekly Sunday services. We're working on building a top-notch integration program and just kind of branching out from there. And yeah, it's been going good so far.
So, well, that's amazing. So the first, thing that comes to mind for me is like, why do you think the molecule is so novel that it's not going to be roped into something like the Federal Analog Act?
So that's a very good question. And trust me, we've done a lot of research and homework on the Analog Act. I guess I can speak to this. So, under the Analog Act, it's really a two-part inquiry. First one, and just to, as a preliminary matter, let me say that the Analog Act has been held to be unconstitutionally vague as violative of due process notice requirements, at least 2, maybe 3 times in federal courts. And here's why: is really because of the first requirement, that it be structurally similar to the parent molecule on the controlled substances list. So there is no real standard there, and the courts have varied so wildly on their assessments that there's really no way to determine ahead of time whether that's going to be the case or not. So, what I tell people when I analyze this for them is like, look, okay, let's just say, for argument's sake, the 4-hydroxylated version of 5-MeO-DMT is in fact structurally similar. They can have that. But the second part of the analysis requires that the substance at issue, the analog, also have the same or substantially similar hallucinogenic effects as the parent molecule. So obviously here, our preliminary argument, is that this does not have hallucinogenic effects, right? And I'll back up for just a minute. So one of the key things about the psilomethoxin is that it doesn't have a large amount of visual or auditory disturbances, right? It's some people do have some visuals on. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that, but like the amount, or it's not this huge colorful experience like psilocybin or a lot of the classic psychedelics is. And so, that would be our ones, that it's not hallucinogenic, and moreover, it's orally available, but a much, much, much weaker form of 5-MeO. And so our second argument would be that it does not have the same or substantially similar effects to 5-MeO. So that would kind of be our argument under the Analog Act. I will say that we're in the process with working with a company out of Canada called Quantified Citizen, who has done digital apps for psychedelic research, and we hope soon to be publishing that app to start gathering data from our membership in those regards.
That's super interesting. Yeah. So 2 times the Federal Analog Act was deemed unconstitutional, right? So like, yeah, that's a big deal. And yeah, like there's so many unconstitutional laws that are always upheld too.
Yes,
right. So
absolutely.
it's, on one hand, I'm like, should I go yell at the IRS that taxes are unconstitutional and like hope to get away with it? Like, I don't know. Like there's this whole, I don't know. I have survival instinct, I guess, where I'm trying to like duck and weave a little bit, but you're an attorney with other attorneys. So you've got
I
a
get it.
plan
I get
here.
it.
So like,
Yeah.
well, I guess let's back up a bunch before we like super dig in here. So you're an attorney. You originally from Louisiana?
No, I'm actually originally from Northeast Texas, right on the border with Shreveport,
Okay.
Louisiana, if you're
Yep.
familiar on Interstate 20.
Awesome. And did you jump into law right away? Did you know it was kind of your thing?
So, I went to the University of Texas for undergraduate and ended up getting picked to do an academic fellowship in Washington, D.C. It would have been the fall of 2006. And through my time there, I had the fortunate to hook up with some very high-powered lobbyists and attorneys, and I guess through those interactions during that semester, I kind of solidified, my drive to want to do that.
Mm. And how soon did psychedelics come into the picture for you?
Yeah, so I had been, to be quite honest, I had been a pretty hardcore drug addict since the age of 12. And part of my, I think at the age of 12, I tried LSD for the first time. And so obviously back then, through my youth and early 20s, um, my use wasn't characterized as it is today as spiritual religious in nature. It was like a lot of people, we can say recreational, but really just to get high, right? So it entered in at a very early age, but my serious use did not kick in till probably 2011.
Mm. Cool. Yeah. And like at what point did you start to see the bridge between psychedelics and religious freedom?
So that would have been back in 2020. Okay, so it's 2020. I had published my first book called Psychedelics and Mental Health Series Psilocybin. Within a week of publishing that book, I was approached by a former Christian pastor locally in Louisiana who was like, "Hey, I want to start a psychedelic church. What do you know about it? And regardless, do you think you could help me, like learn something and help me?" And so, I'm trial and appellate lawyer, I guess, originally by trade. And, once I cracked the books on a legal question that involves psychedelics, that was as interesting. And, you know, for me, the religious spiritual use of psychedelics really jived with my personal experience, right? So it's like that melding there of those two aspects. I was completely enthralled, and even to this day, is something I obsess over, I guess, to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm. It's yeah, it's fun. As soon as you start scratching the surface on these arguments, you see so many holes and opportunities, right? And somebody with your skill set, it's a perfect match, right?
Yeah, I would say, and one more, I would say so. And one other thing is like, I wrote the book about psilocybin research, and one of the things that caught me there was that they were saying, "Oh, very reliably, people are having religious mystical experiences," right? Which jived with me. And then when I came to, oh, so the religious spiritual use of entheogens could be exempted under certain situations, making those connections, it just really resonated with
Mm,
me.
I love that. Um, and was there a particular argument or case that really opened it up for you in an interesting way, like the early peyote cases?
Actually, my original, the two that I feel like I really have read so many times and mastered the content thereof would be the UDV and Santo Daime opinion. But probably the most, because really my interest has always been mostly on the religion question, right? Because it's so fascinating to me to be learning about the evolution of religion, the religion test in our country, and just those contours. So there's a case called the Myers opinion. A lot of people might have heard of it. It was out of Wyoming, I think, in the early '90s, where it was actually an alleged marijuana church case. Which, if you read the case, you already know that was really just a defense to try to cover up a widespread distribution plan. But the court took the time there to really, really dig into the history of the definition of religion and different elements of that test over time, and then elucidated what most lawyers in the space I think would agree is like the penultimate religious test analysis that we have to date. So it's the one that I always use working with people trying to structure, how they say their beliefs and things of that nature. I really go by the factors in that test. So I would say that, the Myers opinion is probably the one that has grabbed the most of my attention.
Mm. And anything in particular in that case? They're really like.
Yeah, so part of the first four factors really centers, and I'll say that like these factors really delve into, they use established religions kind of guideposts. Like, what are some of the external things that most religions have? We could say holidays, special clothing, specific structure. But really, what's really gotten me is like the first four factors talk about what kind of questions and guidance does this religion practice provide? And it's really talking about, does it help its people answer ultimate questions, general specific life questions? Does it talk about, metaphysical matters? So it's kind of like really the part of that analysis that speaks to the substance of the religion has really captivated me because within my own entheogenic psychedelic experiences, a lot of those questions have been answered for me, and so it's like, a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with this, their religions consult the holy book, which is mostly just a collection of religious mystical experiences, right? Whereas, with the groups I've worked with and many other religious spiritual practitioners, it's like the content of the experience is what guides us in those directions. And the fact that it's really specific to everybody, right? It's like what might come through on one person's experience on a Friday night ceremony could be completely different than another's, but in the same breath, they're still working towards answering the same type of questions and reaching the same sort of goals through practicing within those experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And then how did you start attracting all this clientele around religions? I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, so it started slow, and I'll just let you know, I've never done like any. I mean, I've been on podcasts, I've written a couple books and stuff like that. But other than that, like I don't have a website, I don't really do marketing. It's really, Joe, just been word of mouth. From day one, I set off to just like do right, to do right by people, to be punctual, to be thorough, to bring good energy into every project, and then I became intimately connected in the community, meaning that people I worked with 3 years ago, I might still speak to them every month. People always come back to me with questions, and I work with everybody in helping develop kind of the best practices and just sharing information within the community with everybody to make sure everyone is up to date kind of with the status quo, I guess I would say.
That's great. So one thing I've picked up on, and this is probably old news to you. So we have, federal RFRA, Religious Freedom Restoration Act, but we seem to need a similarly themed state level RFRA in order to have the kinds of protection we want with these psychedelic religions. Can you explain how those two work together?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the federal government in the one of the most bipartisan supported bills in the history of Congress, probably not the most, but one of the most bipartisan supported bills, passed the Federal Religious Freedom and Restoration Act in 1993, subsequent to the Smith decision, which was a peyote case that kind of turned the current constitutional standard at the time on its head and basically said that laws of general applicability, like a controlled substances law, they are subject to a lesser constitutional scrutiny, right? Whereas before that, it had been longstanding precedent that those were subject to a heightened level of scrutiny, which is now, and if you read the RFRA, Congress basically says it like, hey, the standard before Smith was right. We think Smith absolutely got it wrong. So therefore, we're writing this act to restore the heightened constitutional standard applied to laws that are even generally applicable. And so then subsequent to that, in 1997, the U.S. Supreme Court in the Bernie case, which was out of Texas, ruled that the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act does not apply to the states. And so, in response to that, I want to say today, and please don't quote me on this, I think almost like 30 states have passed similar or commensurate legislation as the Federal Religious Freedom and Restoration Act. But I can say this is that a lot of states, their constitutions already provided just as much, if not more, protection for religious practices than the federal RFRA. So we see a lot of states didn't do it because of that. Some states who arguably their constitution did provide that protection still did a RFRA. And a good example would be the New Hampshire case, State versus Mac, where it was a oratory mystical sacrament member. On an unrelated civil thing, the police were able to find some of his sacramental mushrooms in a safe, and the prosecutor picked it up, and it went all the way up to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. And they said, and so they were looking at their constitution and deciding whether are we going to use the lower burden of or the lower scrutiny of Smith, or are we going to read into our Constitution within its language a higher, stricter standard as embodied in RFRA? And they decided the former and actually kicked it back to the trial court, and it was dismissed. But yeah, so it's just an example of, state constitutional language being read in a manner that afforded the same amount of protection as the federal RFRA. And that's not to say not every state would do that, but it's a good example of how they, interpret it one way or the other.
Well, that's a big deal. So I've been hearing about so many churches popping up that I've been getting nervous for people. Like one of my friends was recently involved in that Denver case, for instance.
Yeah, very familiar.
And thankfully ended up okay. But it was definitely scary there for a bit. And so like one thing I sit on is like the responsibility of maybe leaders, religious leaders, to be super explicit about, possible consequences, I guess, because yes, maybe it's unconstitutional, and yes, maybe with enough firepower we could hold it up in court. But, not everybody has the cash or time or just resources, I guess, generally to defend it. So like, how do we negotiate that skillfully as leaders if this is what we're up to?
Well, no, that's a very good question, observation. I will say this, that through all of the case law research that I've done, and that's including a lot of federal and state cases, I've yet to ever see one case where a member of a psychedelic religion was ever gone after. It's always been usually the top leader is usually the one that they're squarely looking at that goes up, on trial and is prosecuted. But again, that's to not say that it never occurs. But I'll say this is that I do believe that a lot of people, even members of these churches, understand that this is a gray area of law. And I think a lot of the leaders do make that clear to people that like, hey, it's gray. We've done what we can to try to, from the inception to build this in a manner that's most protected. But, I would say that most of them do disclose, at least to a certain degree, that, yeah, this is a gray area of law. It's not exactly black and white. But yeah, I mean, I agree that, it should be known to people to a certain degree that this isn't a black and white thing, right?
Yeah, right. Agreed. Yeah, there does need to be a certain level of disclosure for this to be an ethical thing. But we need those people to be able to push back, right? Everybody that's playing a part, I think, is doing something really important.
Yeah, I do too. And it's one of those things. It's like, and again, the only people I work with, the only people I'll ever agree to work with, are people who I think are sincere. And that their religious beliefs as it relates to the sacrament and the ceremony relies to their level of religious, but most importantly, people who have enough sense about them and experience to safely bring someone through a process, right? And yeah, no, I think that ultimately, those people, the good people who are able to really do this coherently, out there practicing and doing this is a very important part of the movement.
Yeah. And kind of has been for a long time, right? It's only now becoming more visible, I think. But I believe there is all sorts of interesting activity in the history, right? Like I can't remember some of these churches, but I'm pretty sure churches have been operating through the 80s and 90s, even in New York City. Um,
Yeah, through this work, Joe, yeah, I came to realize that. So it's like a lot of the people who I've worked with had been doing it 5, some 10 years for quite some time and had actually quite an established network and community of people that had been doing. So yeah, I was very surprised too to learn when I got into the space that it wasn't as rare and uncommon as I once thought,
mm.
for sure.
Are you familiar with Tim Leary's call to actions way back about starting religions?
I do remember that they had started the League of Spiritual Discovery, I think, which I think eventually the court kind of struck down. But yeah, I was familiar with that. I didn't know that he had like explicitly made a call publicly for it.
Yeah, I don't know which book, but I definitely heard it in some talks. It was really I think prudent at the time. Like the more people who could come forward and take a stand, the better, right? And that's I think what we're seeing right now. Like I don't what court or what judge would feel really good about taking a religion to to court?
Yeah, and along those lines, I'll say this too is that, through reading the cases, I'll say that a lot of courts and judges don't really want to delve too far. They realize that religious beliefs and practices are very, very deeply intimate and personal to people. And so unless they smell some BS from the start, most of them will assume a lot of credibility there because it's like you're digging into something that's just so deep and intimate to people. And you're right, a lot of these are like, for instance, the churches I've worked with who've, to my knowledge, never harmed anyone. As a matter of fact, have benefited the lives of many people. When you go to court on that, who's the victim? And what was exactly the harm done? And I think that's why, especially the federal law provides protection for people who are safe and sincere in practicing their religion. Because again, when we look at the government's interest in, preventing that or coming down on that, it in the federal standard has to be compelling. And so far as we've seen in the UDV Santo Daime cases, at least they've been unable to establish it.
Um, I don't know if you saw this one. We did a year and a half ago, maybe a series, religious liberty in the United States, something along those lines, a free series that we did with number of attorneys, and the idea was what's the unicorn case that you would want if you were going to take it all the way through the Supreme Court?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. That's and I'll say this: working with a lot of probably the attorneys that were working with y'all, that's always a conversation of, and there's a constant kind of tug and war between, do we help people who might not have the absolute best facts that we can ever surmise of to even go out there and practice in the instance that they're the case that goes up to the Supreme Court, or do we not? And just to be honest, I told you kind of my parameters for helping people. Sure, there's probably some facts that some of the people I work with probably wouldn't be the ideal case, to go up per se. But I think the essential good facts for pretty much everyone I worked with are there. And when we talk about a unicorn case, it's just like the probability. Like, so I'll say this: I think the eagle and the condor is a unicorn case, right? They've been working with the lawyers at Chacruna for a very long time, and I feel very confident. And look, they did an excellent job at absolutely crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's, and I'll support them 100%, and I love their chances.
right. I would bet a lot more money on Eagle and Condor than I would have on something like Soul Quest. And maybe we can chat about
Yeah,
Soul
yeah,
Quest for a minute. Like,
yeah. I'd be
why do
glad
you
to.
think Soul
Yeah.
Quest didn't do so well?
Well, Soul Quest is still being litigated. I think a lot of people, the DEA entered that letter into the district court record. And, one thing I'll say in the sixth chapter of my third book about the definition of religion, I actually delve way into this. And, yeah, when you read the DEA letter, it doesn't sound good. But as a lawyer, I actually went and scratched the surface of the underlying case law that would be argued in that case. And as you'll see in my book, even though the DEA painted it as really bad, like I think if the proper lawyer is able to get in front of the circuit court where it is now, because they, the district court kicked it out because SolQuest let the DEA enter that letter in the record, right? Because if they had not done that, they would have still had jurisdiction in the district court. So, under the Controlled Substances Act, if the DEA makes a final agency decision pursuant to that law, you no longer have recourse in the district court. Now, obviously, when we talk about religious exemptions, the consensus amongst us attorneys, especially in space, is that the DEA has no authority to determine someone's sincerity, and you wouldn't want to be in a system where an executive governmental agency like that can determine your sincerity, can determine your religion. But see, what the judge grasped onto was the fact that they made a decision as to whether the Soul Quest was following proper diversion protocols and procedures. And, admittedly, under the Controlled Substances Act, that's one of their main things, that they have administrative authority over the call. So it's like, yeah, part of that analysis they entered, they have zero authority over. In the other half, they do. So does that mean that they have now lost jurisdiction there? Well, and I disagree with this decision, but the district court said yes. And so, now what we see is that there's a risk. You run a risk of allowing the DEA to make a call, and I bet you from now on they'll be quick in denying people in making a call on your religious exemption, because you could potentially lose your jurisdiction in federal court. Now, we need to also examine that in the context of the Arizona Yahe case in Arizona, which is also being actively litigated, where they did not file a DEA exemption. And the district court there said, no harm, no foul. This is not a valid government process. So you did not do anything wrong or improper by not filing with the DEA. So we do have kind of two somewhat contradictory opinions, with SolQuest. They skirted the line, between portraying themselves as like a health and wellness center in a church, and so, they had aspects of both in it. But my philosophy in this has always been, and I think eventually the courts will come around to realize that where medical and scientific and religious and spiritual begin or end within this space is not crystal clear, right? Because as we're all aware, in the research, people even in clinical settings are having mystical religious experiences, right? And then they see that really many times translates to positive outcomes. And so you're like, if people even in a medical setting can have a religious experience, well, then where does this is a religious exercise, this is not, come into play? And so another thing too is that, and I kind of made this connection just the other day, admittedly, is that, even in the UDV case that the Supreme Court ruled on, the UDV has doctors on staff in Brazil that help with screening, who help provide safety protocols and procedures for in ceremony. So we've seen a case through the Supreme Court that had some decent medical involvement in the church, and the government didn't even contest whether they were practicing a religion or not.
Right. A cynical part of me wants to suggest perhaps it's only because there are Christian elements in UDV and Santo Daime. But
yeah, so go ahead.
No, that's all. It's kind of the extent of the comment. But these other groups doing things that look very similar to legal Christian groups, but they can't do it.
Yeah, so and I get it, and I agree that to the extent that the government didn't controvert it, probably had to do with the Christian element being involved there. I would definitely agree with that. But again, after my reading of the case law and the history of the evolution of both the religion and the test of it, I still think that the run-of-the-mill entheogenic church religion in this country, whether it's tied to a lineage or whether it's tied to Christianity or not, in most instances would fit the bill. And here's why. One, the Supreme Court has clearly said that whether someone's beliefs are held by one person for one day or whether it's been held by millions of people for thousands of years are still worthy of the same protection. Now, when it comes as an evidentiary matter, proving whether this is a religious exercise or not, it's obvious a lot easier when you have all the history and stuff, but you're not out of the woods, even if it's your sincere belief held for one day, because the court will examine other things like even academic works or any other supporting works that could bolster your assertion that what you're claiming is a religion. And when we go back to the conscientious objector cases, which were the ones that started to really spur the Supreme Court's move away from purely monotheistic religious views, both of those cases uh, were concerning purely idiosyncratic views, meaning that the guys there that won their conscientious objector cases, there, as far as we know, there wasn't anybody else in this world that held the exact same religious belief system, right? And so I think that that's a good example of the fact that, yeah, I mean, again, a solo spiritual religious and theogen based practitioner, I think, with the proper support, could absolutely be declared a protected religious exercise. But again, it's an evidentiary matter, so proving that up would be up to the lawyer of pulling the proper sources and lodging the proper arguments in that direction.
Yeah. So yeah, I like that intellectual exercise. So yeah, the reality of it is if they come down on people, who who's next, I guess, is one speculation, right? Like after the Denver situation, like is there going to be, another group getting made example of somewhere?
That's a very good question, Joe. And to theorize on exactly who that is, I think would be a little speculative. But my view has always been that it's probably going to be people practicing underground, meaning people who have not like formally kind of filed a nonprofit and are doing proper step. And also too, it's weird because as the research progresses, even the clinical research, we start to learn more and more that these substances, when used in the proper set and setting, are not near as dangerous as they once were made out to be. And so, the government's burden is to prove a compelling governmental interest in safety and diversion. And the more that these clinical trials work up that safety angle, the less of a case that the government's going to have in that regard. And just so you know, a compelling governmental interest is a very high burden. And even in 2006 with ayahuasca, with the UDV, the government said this is an equipoise 50-50. Government did not meet its burden, and that was based off one study that Dennis McKenna and them had done down with the UDV. So you can imagine, as this thing has progressed over time, I would say the safety for most entheogen psychedelics has absolutely been proven up more over time. And so what does that mean? To me, that means that they're going to be looking for people who they can show that are either not sincere or not practicing a religion. And so my theory has always been that, look, having at least some evidence in the public record that you're sincere and that you have a spiritual religious practice, I think actually plays in your favor and makes you a less attractive target, because that's evidence just already existing going towards your case. Whereas a lot of these underground people, it would be purely based upon their testimony. And we all know that these federal prosecutors and federal agents are masters at interrogating people in such a manner as to get them to say many, many inconsistent things that they can then go to the judge and say, look, this guy or this person doesn't know, they're definitely not sincere. They're all over the map. And moreover, they can't really elucidate a coherent set of religious beliefs and practices. So my theory has always been that uh, underground people are probably going to be a more attractive target than most people who are actually above ground doing it legitimately, being safe, having some type of structure and things. So that's my call. I could be absolutely wrong, but that's kind of my take on
Mm. I like that. And I'd agree that the more cover you have, the safer you are. And yeah, evidence counts as cover often.
it. Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
mm, it-
I'll say this as a trial lawyer, working these churches up. Because I did trial and appellate work obviously before I switched over to here, and so all my workup is really centered around that evidentiary thing, right? I'm always working with them, my people, to create an internal documented record that should it ever, God forbid, ever have to go to court, will be easily admissible, and will speak to all the high points, right? That a court would be looking at. So that's, I'm like you, it's all in the evidence, and so I've been real keen on focusing on what would this look like if it went to trial as far as evidence is concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So let's turn back to the Church of Psilomethoxin, if you're cool with that. And like, I want to kind of understand, I guess, a little bit more about the molecule. So you said Shulgin had this identified and said it was a good candidate for research.
Well, yeah, he basically said there was no research, again because of the intensity and the labor involved. I mean, I've heard from other chemists that it could take up to 30 days to synthesize the molecule, and so for it to be kind of mass produced or synthesized on a mass level, the cost would probably outweigh the benefits, I guess I would say.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do you like, is there a pretty good contained history inside the church of, who kind of made this happen with the mushroom first?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously we don't like disclose, and I'll let you know, our production happens in Canada and Mexico, so we've never like told the people like who did it, but yeah, it's known that Ian was the first one working in conjunction with people that he knew to run the first test of trying to produce it, I guess I would say.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Um, and then, what were the actual ends or goals in mind around forming the religion? Was it to have a community of practice? Was it safety? Like, what was the
Yeah.
situation there?
To be honest, and I know this is kind of a lofty goal, Joe, but really it's an attempt beyond doing our normal spiritual religious practice with sacrament. Like the overarching goal is to try to help shift the paradigm of religion away from secondary religious phenomena like holy books. And not to say that those are bad, right? I don't want anybody to think that I'm up here bashing anyone's religious because I respect all of them, but really giving people a new option of focusing on primary direct experiences, right? And creating a container in a community where it's, we're non dogmatic. So we don't tell anybody you have to or have to not believe certain things. And I can tell you the law doesn't require it. But what we're doing is creating a container, a community where through integration, working as a community, and through our Sunday services and stuff, like exploring a lot of these answers to ultimate questions, right? Where it's like, we might cover a topic on a Sunday service and we're not saying this is correct, you have to believe this, right? But it's really just throwing out there different theories, different ideas, concepts, a lot of them very ancient, and just giving some stuff out there for people to possibly latch on to. But at the end of the day, if they come and say, this is what I believe, and there's not another person in this church that believes it, we expect our members and all of our leaders to 100% respect that.
Well, that's interesting. So that's not really how I would have expected it to be set up, right? Like, this is actually an authentic approach, inquisitive approach, and open, right? As opposed to what I would expect, which is you have to conform to the dogma and the materials.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, this goes back to the Myers case I discussed earlier. One of the main points in that case that really stuck out to me is when the court was elucidating all these factors, they dropped a footnote. And what did they say? They said, look, we could add dogma to this list, no doubt, because as we know, most religions are dogmatic, but, the court recognizing that over history, this has led to some not desired, potentially negative consequences. We're not going to put it on the list. And so, ever since that time, it's not really been overtly a factor. Sure, I mean, I'm sure courts could look and say, oh, there's dogma. This is indicative of religion per se, but like that's not a make or break it thing. And I think the courts realize that moving away from that, at least somewhat, is probably a desirable thing as far as social equity and justice. And that might not be the correct term, but a move away might be a desirable move.
Well, that's
Mhm.
fascinating. Um, And now, with it being a similar but much lighter experience of 5-MeO DMT, are you pulling from some of the literature around that for your church's material, or do you pull from like the psychedelic canon, or how did you kind of put things together?
No, that's a very good question. So, and obviously, like I said earlier, a lot of our people have worked with 5-MeO DMT, and I will say this that we do have some core beliefs. Again, that nobody, we're not pressuring anybody to believe, but like really, one of our core beliefs is that in the peak entheogenic experience, like 5-MeO, right, where you experience unitive cosmic consciousness, that that tells us that's basically our moral code. That once you experience unity with all, that tells you pretty much everything that you'll ever need to know about how you should be treating other people, how you should be treating other beings, and how you should be treating the environment.
That's cool. And when you run your services with substance, are you doing it in a ceremonial container, or do people do it at home alone?
Yeah, so right now it's online, and our goal is eventually to have various physical locations around the United States, but we're not there yet. We're working. So yeah, we do them online. We've hired a former Christian pastor named Chuck Crisco who had kind of a turnaround in, his thinking and believing as it relates to Christianity and religion. He's the one that's been delivering our messages. So like during the Sunday services, we open it up with a prayer and a blessing of the sacrament. If people feel so called, absolutely. If not, and it's open to the general public too. So obviously, there's a potential that people show up that have never had a chance to even acquire any, right? So yeah, it's not a mandatory part of it, but yeah, for those who do want to, we do a specific blessing or prayer at the beginning of the service.
That's very interesting. Um, cool. So, and like, what kind of results are you seeing? Like, I assume you have some amazing stories.
Yeah, so our one of our beliefs, again, not dogmatic, but kind of a fundamental belief is that spirit permeates all planes of existence, including the mental and the physical, right? So our position is that if people are progressing or digressing on a spiritual level, that can obviously manifest certain effects on the physical and mental planes. And so yeah, I mean, we've had people that and a lot of this was it's shared like in our group, but really at our integration groups have been great because people have kind of got to like come and be on camera and like personally testify their experiences. And yeah, I mean, people have had incredible, and some people granted have taken macrodoses of the sacrament, but everyone has reported just unbelievable experiences. I mean, to be honest, to date we really haven't had maybe one report that you could maybe say was negative. It's pretty much been all positive feedback in people. Yeah, as far as manifesting on the mental plane, people have reported that it's helped their depression, PTSD, and stuff like that. On the physical plane, people have reported that it's helped with chronic pain, and so you know that's why we're bringing in the research because I think I told you earlier. One of our things is that in ancient times, science and medicine, spirit, nature, and religion, they were all studied as one, right? And sort of embodied kind of with the hermeticist and stuff in one context. And so, we believe, especially with psychedelics, it's a great place for those two camps to kind of come back together, right? Because we're dealing with, mystical religious experiences, but what we're seeing are results that can be quantified and measured, right? So part of our thing is bringing that back together, and that's why we're doing the research, for scientific medical purposes, allowing them to run their analysis on it. Not that the church is necessarily concerned ultimately with efficacy per se, but just to lend a hand out to the scientific medical community and say, look, we realize that y'all are doing good work too, that this work can also benefit others in society and humanity, and therefore we agree to reach across the aisle and let's work together. And part of the research too will be on the spiritual part of it, and actually some pretty groundbreaking research is going to be done about the phenomena of psychedelic religion. So we're going to be probing like people's motivations for coming. What are they getting out of our program as far as integration for the Sunday services? And so that's obviously the measures we're most interested in. But yeah, we're definitely going to let the researchers probe on the physical and mental aspects of it
Mm.
too.
So I've always wondered about that. It seems as though the scheduling system makes psychedelic research inappropriately expensive, and the religious organizations could provide some really interesting cover and lower the cost of research, which I think would be spectacular, right? MAPS is about to be the first nonprofit ever to bring a drug through. What about the first church? I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah, so I agree. And admittedly, Joe, ever since I really started in this space, man, I've really, I have a lot of church contacts, and I have a lot of churches that would be more than willing to allow, anonymous questionnaires to be handed their people. Some people might even submit to physical or mental examinations, and I've always thirsted for that. So this opportunity is a real blessing to me. And I'll point back to the UDV case. The case or the study that the UDV used to work up their safety argument was one actually done on their people, right? It was the one Dennis McKinnon did a study on the UDV, and then the UDV used that as evidence in court to bolster their religion. But yeah, as far as the cost, you're right, terribly prohibitive. To do research, especially on a Schedule One. And yeah, I mean, obviously you can't get the what would I say? The factors down as neatly as you can in clinical research, as far as this exact dosage at this exact time with all these there's a lot of exact parameters in clinical research, but I still think the data would be still, I mean, great and can be used in a manner that's productive.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. We're not going to answer all the questions, but some of the stuff could be made cheaper, right? At least like phase zero. Yeah,
Exactly.
which could be really interesting. Um, hmm. And have you seen religions, or even the Church of Psilomethoxin, have benefit from partnering with universities?
You know, um, I'm trying to think. It seems like there was somebody else who were part. I really, to be honest, outside of like the UDV, and obviously they benefited from partnering with them. I'm not aware of this happen. I mean, not to say it has not happened before. It probably definitely has in some degree, some type. And that's one thing about the churches is that, man, there is so much cross disciplinary research that could be done, through questioning and doing analysis of the participants. So, maybe, and we've always kind of focused on the mental health, medical kind of part of it, obviously, but like maybe there were other universities, sociology or social science department, these other departments could have at one time done some research that probably came up with some interesting material, but I'm just not aware of it off the top of my head.
Yeah. Um, and how do you all do kind of membership intake or service kind of requests like that?
Yeah, so on our website we have a membership application form. It's not too voluminous. And yeah, people apply. And I'll say this too is that we really prefer member to member referrals, if possible. We will accept some people freestanding, but it's much easier to see that someone who's already a member of the church that hopefully personally knows someone can send them our way. But yeah, other than that, we have, again, not too voluminous, but a membership application form that we check out and just kind of, admittedly, it's really just a judgment call, mostly on me. I'm the one that really thumbs through them. But yeah, so we do it that way. And look, I've had to reject quite a few people, and part of when we reject people, we tell them like, hey, look, this isn't permanent, you know, like go to a few of our Sunday services. And a lot of people, it's just not, they're not getting specific enough for me on some of the open-ended questions. For me to feel comfortable that they're necessarily a good fit or not. But yeah, it's membership application. We have a membership fee. You're in the church. You can have access to the sacrament. And then also you're into our integration program, and our next move is to we've integrated a Discord server into the back end of our website, and our plan there is really to link people up regionally. In addition to, we're slowly rolling out a ceremony facilitators program where we're going to eventually be approving. For sure, initially, just highly experienced people to serve and facilitate ceremony with the sacrament, and you know, eventually we can open it up for people who are initially a little bit less qualified to go and train under other certified people. But we need to kind of get a solid foundation and people spread out enough to facilitate that part of it. So, yeah.
Mm. So, yeah, that's great. I think it's important to have a really detailed, robust kind of intake. Yeah, and that's awesome. You do it that way. How about like clinicians inside your organization, like you mentioned, Sanodyme earlier?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So and it's funny that as soon as we kind of opened up, we had clinicians, doctors of all ilk reach out to us and offer their help on many things. And so yeah, we've consulted with doctors, a lot of it on their kind of opinion on safety and stuff like that. Obviously there's not a ton of hardcore safety data, but we are working with and just people have asked me not to disclose fully who exactly it is, but we have some pretty knowledge and experienced people who are actually very psychedelic specific knowledge on pharmacological effects of entheogens, working with us through the research to gather up as much safety data as we can get, so that way they can start publishing papers on that. And then and like we have an anesthesiologist who's been an advisor to us, and it's been good. A lot of them reach out, and I'll tell you this is a lot of them, the first thing they say is like, "Hey, we like your message." You know what I mean? We like your message. This is obviously a brand new thing that we're extremely interested in, and we offer support in any way we can. And our, since day one, I've always said, any medical practitioner that wants to get involved and advise us or whatever they might want to do, we've let them in. And I guess the last thing is like our integration program. Some of the top psychiatrists from around the country who've already been, at least to a certain degree, involved in psychedelic research have offered to, help over time refine and make our integration program as good as we can have it.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Well, what have we missed? I'm sure we missed plenty.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Are you going to be at Canada?
Oh, yes, sir. Yeah, we'll get to hang out there. That'll be fun.
Yeah, we'll be there.
Yeah, you'll see me.
Man.
Do you have a table?
We did. We got a booth in the exhibition, and then we're going to do a panel for the church, and then I have a legal talk with Gary Smith, and then we were also, there's some type of VIP event they asked us to come and do a psilomethoxin guided meditation for, so we're going to show up with some of our people. Actually my wife does guided meditations during our Sunday services, so she and another of our members are going to come and do that for the people. So we were offered some great opportunities at Canadelic. We're extremely grateful for that, and we're going to show up and try to make it as memorable of an event as we can. I went and spoke last year and thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hear the show up this year is supposed to be like three times that amount, so it should be an incredible event.
Yeah, I'm excited. We're a title sponsor there. It's going to be fun. I think I'm moderating 3 panels, maybe.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. You with your podcast and what y'all do, to me, you would be a go-to moderator. You ask good questions.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Sure. And it's gonna be interesting for sure. I find it fascinating. It's in South Florida, and that there's so much attention. Those two things combined are just massively interesting to me. Because we're not only getting like the wealthy white population, we're getting like Caribbean folks.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll say this too is ever since day one, working in the space, I've been it's been kind of slow moving, but I'm very dedicated to bringing these substances and kind of these practices to just as wide array of people as possible. And so, like with last year at Canadelic, they had a very diverse mix of people, especially in the exhibition hall. So I welcome the opportunity to get to mix with again, not just wealthy white people, but other people who have come and shown an interest in this direction.
Right. People from really all over. It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's going to be great. I'm glad you're getting some press there, and I think it's yeah, like we just need more people to have access to these things, and I think religions are a really valid way to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I've learned, and I learned real quick working with these churches, is that especially post COVID, the community for a lot of people is just as not more healing and spiritual than the actual ceremonies. The ceremonies are kind of like the catalyst, but following up in the churches who've worked hard to build a big community, it's beautiful to see all those people come together. And so, yeah, I think that's a huge component of it.
Yeah. It's the community is fantastic and super important. That's probably one of the reasons I'm still in the psychedelic space, because I fell into a really good community.
Oh yeah, me too. That's also a big reason why I'm here too.
And it's a weird urge to have, right? But we want to like make sure other people have a similar opportunity, just because it was so valuable for us, right?
Yeah, and that's what I see again with the churches, people coming forward wanting help. And look, it's natural because again, I'll point back again the research that I've done many times is that, it shows people and I think Johns Hopkins even said that like most people rate it within like the top 5 most, memorable, impactful experiences of their life. And so, seeing people want to create a community and provide that for other people is it makes sense to me.
Yeah. So cool, Greg. Well, what's the website people can check out for the church?
Yeah, it's www.psilomethoxin.com. We have a private Facebook group. If you want to join the Facebook group, we'll be glad to have you. Just let us know in the comments that you came from Psychedelics Today, and yeah, and we also have YouTube, all that good stuff too. So feel free to check us out, and yeah, even if you feel so called, want to join, feel free to apply. Again, just put Psychedelics Today in there. I'll know where you came from, and yeah, we'd be glad to have you.
Well, Greg Lake, thank you so much for joining, and hope we get to do it again. Thanks for all your work out there.
Yeah, just anytime, Joe. Just let me know, and hats off to you for your work too, bro.
Thank you.